First day now of Yarne. Fortunate to be here again. As they say in Yarne, the focus should be on Tosam Kom Sum. So study, contemplation, and meditation. So traditionally, it was a time when there would be teachings. We often have teachings by the Khenpo during this time, although he hasn't been doing this year. I'm not sure what they're planning to do, but in the meantime, we can do here. It's meant to be a little extra, and that is Sera. We don't really have a time when we're not doing Tusam Gomsum, but you have a little bit extra push during this time. So we started. We had Sojong this morning, and then the Genrin-Pache recited the Patimoksha Sutra and one of the opening verses. It's not actually a verse of the sutra, I don't believe, but it's one of the verses he recites before. It's Pakpa Namni Tongwalek Yonda Droba Daktu De Chipa Namni Mi Tongwa Datu Daktu Dewanidu Gyur. So it's wonderful to see all the Aryas assembled, being in the company of virtuous friends is happiness. And if one doesn't associate with childish people, then one will always be happy. That isn't meant to be it doesn't mean we don't have compassion for people who are spiritually immature. That's not the point, but it's just emphasizing the importance of good company. The Buddha emphasizes a lot, the importance of keeping the right company, whether you advance on the path or not, or go in the wrong direction. Depends very much upon the friends that you keep and who you associate with. So it's very good to be in a community of people who are sincerely trying to practice, and that will enhance our own study, our own practice, even though sometimes there can be conflicts, and sometimes it can get discouraging, seeing, of course, there are many young monks here in the monastery who act like young people, but at least they're trying. They're in a community that's encouraging them to develop their minds in a positive way, try to make their lives as meaningful as possible. So it's good to always rejoice in that and feel how fortunate we are to be here. Because sometimes, that can be forgotten. It's very easy when people come and visit Sera and they say how I love to be here. I wish I could live here. But then when that actually happens, sometimes, as the saying goes, the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. So it's good to reflect on that and remember when we're here. So where we stopped last week, right? On my it's on page 9, but it's going to be different from you. You all have it? Yeah. Chirna. Gandhi Trudu, right? Trudu, yeah. Chirna. Gandhi Trudu. Yeah. So we were talking about Atisha. We had the good qualities of the teacher, because that was the idea that we, in order to establish the teachings, right? So they kung tsumper denpe chir sepapo chewa, right? So in order to show that the source of the teachings is noble, then to show the good qualities of the person who gave the teachings. Meaning, teaching here is talking about the Bodhi, the lamp for the path to enlightenment, which is the source for the Lam.RIM lineage, or the Lam.RIM structure of teachings. So then we have the good qualities of Atisha. So we had, Rik Ponsun Sopar, Kewa Jepetsu, the way he was born in a good lineage, and then Den de la Yunanipitsu, so how he found good qualities on that basis of that human life, and then Nyene, Temple the Charwazepitsu, so after he found those good qualities, and how he enacted activities for the benefit of the teachings. So then in that last part, the benefit of the teachings, then we have, Pudu Zepitsu, Gagurda Zepitsu, and Pudu Zepitsu, or what he did in India, and then what he did in Tibet. So we've already come to Tibet. And so we had a little bit last week about his coming to Tibet and how they invited him, the king Geshe and his son Yajajapa, But now there's a little bit of a digression about what the situation was like in Tibet. So we have Chirna, generally speaking, Gangri Trodir, so in this snowland, Dempa Ngadar, so we have Ngadar, right? The Dempa Ngadar is the earlier spread of the teaching, earlier propagation. And we have Jebachidar, the later propagation, which is mainly centered around Atisha's time. So the Ngadar was maybe in the 8th century. We alluded to this before. There was the spread of the teachings. So 7th century, it started with Tsongkhapa, but especially then the 8th century with Trisong Detsen and Shantarakshita and Padmasambhava. And for a couple hundred years, that was established in Tibet during the time of the Tibetan Empire, when Tibet was a major power in Central Asia. And then with the collapse of the empire, that fell apart. So then there was some later dissemination, inviting more teachers from India, and this Great Treatise, and then also the Kagyu lineage from Marpa, and the Sakya lineage stemming from Virupa, and then spreading gradually through, I mentioned before about Drogmi Lotsawa, and then Sachen Kungi Ningpo. So these were all around that time. It was 100 years or so. Lisha was coming. So anyway, Ngardarla, this earlier dissemination had Pelin Shiwatso, so Shantarakshita, and then Padma Sambhava. Padma Sambhave, Dembe Sol Tsukbala. So they established this tradition. Topa Niki Koa Nedu Masama Latene. So because people they had not become given a good understanding of emptiness, is what it's saying. Tapki Chala Gurjing. So those who had not gained a good grasp of emptiness, then they would denigrate the teachings on method, right? They would because they mainly, when it says they did not grasp emptiness, it means that they misapprehended emptiness. So they thought emptiness meant that there's a kind of a nihilism, so there's no need to practice the method side. And then Ila Chipa Kurjing Ila Chipa Tamje. Buddha Chipatamje Gope, yeah. So he negated any need to call anything to mind. Right? Ila Chipa is like taking an object of meditation and meditating on something. So he negated that. So Gyanaki Kempo Hashang, right? The Hashang is a Mohayan, right? They say Mahayana, but I think Mohayan is the correct pronunciation. Dempa Dibar Chepa. So yeah, this caused the teachings to become obscured. I have to be careful. It could be politically incorrect to talk about it this way in modern parlance. We have to look at kind of the situation that was going on, right? For one thing, Hashang just means monk, right? Gelong. So it's already a bit derogatory to be saying that the Chinese monk who came to Tibet. But yeah, the understanding is that there was a particular style of practice that was being practiced, and even the Tibetans acknowledge, even in some of the traditional texts, you'll see that they say this is not meant to be a representation of Chinese Buddhism in general. It's this one particular teacher who had a misunderstanding, and also whether or not this particular person had such views that are being told about him, the story about him, because it's not certain. There's different accounts. It might be a bit of a caricature, but at the same time, the main point is it highlights a particular view that is an issue in Buddhism. It's been an issue historically throughout Buddhism in many different places. This idea that you don't need to study or think, you just need to meditate, and that meditation doesn't mean contemplating or analyzing things. It just means trying to stop the thought process and go beyond thoughts. So of course there are some forms of meditation that could be taken that way. When you hear about Dzogchen or Zen, it could be understood that they're saying that thinking is an obstacle. But you have to be very careful to look clearly at what they're saying. And also, for example, with Dzogchen itself, it's a culmination of a long stage of practice. It's not like one immediately just goes into this practice of Dzogchen. And then in Zen, even in the Zen tradition, we have one biography there. It's quite nice. Wild Ivy I see it right now in the shelf there. It's a autobiography of Haikun, who was a Japanese, maybe 17th century, I think it is. It's interesting to see because he was encountering the same thing there in Japan, which within the Zen tradition. He was a Zen, but Zen monk himself, but he was encountering this view among some people that he thought had become commonplace in the time, which was that you don't need to accumulate merit, you don't need to do a lot of analysis, you just have to kind of rest your mind in this natural state. And he came to the opinion that this was a misinterpretation of the traditional Zen teachings, and he strongly fought against that and was quite influential. So we see this view comes up at various times, and even today there are a lot of people who in the West, it's quite a common view that meditation means non-thinking, that it's kind of antithetical to meditation to think. But that's the view that is being confronted here. And that in Tibet was quite strongly dismissed early on and became quite influential. So we have Hashang Mahayana, or Mahoyan, who he's talking about here, and then Lopan Chenpo Kamala Shila, who is the Indian scholar, the student of Chandarakshita, who came from India and was debating in front of the king with Mahoyan. So Kamala Shile Lekbar Kakne. So he negated that view. He strongly debated against him at Samye, the debate at Samye. And then Gyewe Gompa Tenla Bape. So he correctly delineated the intention of the teacher, the Buddha. Ku Shindu Chela, Kudin Shindu Chela. So he was very kind in doing so, and this was very influential in Tibet. According to the story, Hashang Mohayan was banished from Tibet. He was told that, thank you for your teachings. Please go back to China. We'd like to focus on this lineage from Kamalashila, from Chandarakshita, that involves critical analysis. And then Chidar. So Chidar, the later propagation of the teachings. Chidar la, Gyude don, Loberzuma la. So so there was the first that issue in the earlier propagation, and now in the later propagation. So Gyude is the Tantra class, right? They misapprehended or mistook the Tantra class of teachings, the meaning of it. So De La Tene, Pandita Tang, Naljiba, Lompa Gajik. So those who fancied themselves, Lompa, they fancied themselves as Panditas or as yogis, Gajiki. So some of those ones, Tempe Tsawa, Samprachupala. So Tempe Tsawa, Samprachupa, right? The root of the teachings, which is Brahmacharya, which means celibacy. This is talked about in some of the early the lower vehicle sutras, like it says in Shantideva, right? Tense Geloniana, Gelonidu Kawarne, right? So Tensa, the root of the teachings, is Gelongs, meaning in this context is specifically celibate practitioners. So the idea is that this is the very heart of the Buddha's teachings, is monastic practitioners, and then Nupur Chenpo Chela. So they brought great harm to that, because these particular practitioners were saying you don't need to be celibate. Of course, it's understood in the Tibetan tradition there is a place for non-celibate practitioners in Tantra. There is indeed a place where it is appropriate to use sexual desire on the path, but it should be done with an understanding of what's the right context for that. And to just dismiss celibacy as useless is quite harmful to the teachings. So it seems that some of these teachers, they were, what are some of the names of them? I think there was Acharya Marpo, so the red Acharya, and then Shamtab Nunpo, so the blue Shamtab, the blue lower robe. These were two teachers who were teaching in Tibet, who were said to have kind of spreading these cult-like ideas about Tantra, which I mentioned, I think, earlier, is kind of, there's some of this going on in the modern times too. All kinds of different teachers. So anyway, this kind of thing was going on in Tibet during the later propagation. So then, Kebu Dampadi, so Kebu Dampa, this great being, meaning Atisha, Lekbar Gache. So he negated that. So it's kind of comparing him to Kamalashila earlier on. And in Zhenyang's Lober Zungwa Nam Nu.RIM.CHEN.MO. So he kind of abolished these wrong apprehensions of the teachings. In Chinji Lope Tempa, so the wrong teachings, Powered Zepe, Chinji Malope Tempa, sorry, the unmistaken teachings, Chinji Malope Tempa, Powered Zepe, so he spread the correct teachings. Kawa Chempa Tamchela, Kujingi Kaperzedo, so he spread his kindness to all of the ones of the snowman. So Detar Tube Gomba Sour Chipe, Shung Sampa Layang. So, and also in terms of how he composed this text that clarified the intent of the Buddha's teachings. Sampa Layang, Puntum Sope Gyu Somyote. So, okay. So if one wants to compose a text that clarifies the meaning of the Buddha's teachings, you need to have three causes. This is part of the tradition, is an understanding of you need to fulfill these three causes to be qualified to write a text. So first, you have Sheche Rikpe Nenga Kepa. You're skilled in the 5 forms of knowledge, which is, as we mentioned, I think before, there's artisanship, and then medicine, which are intended that way you can look after your disciples, and then in logic and grammar, which are both useful for refuting wrong views. And then, of course, Buddhism. That's what you have to be skilled in to be able to teach in it. Sometimes this is presented like Sheche Rikpa Tamche, like all the classes of knowledge. But I think that was kind of a catchphrase. You have these 5 classes of knowledge, and this is kind of the extent of knowledge. So really, I've often taken this, and if we look closely at the Bodhisattva vows, they give the Bodhisattva vow about so in that one, it's saying if you read about non-Buddhist teachings, then you put effort into reading about them, then the vow is not to put inordinate effort into it. But in that section, Tsongkhapa, he goes into a very long explanation of when it's a good time to study non-Buddhist texts and why and what qualifications you need, how much to do so. But clearly there's an understanding that this is an important thing to do. And His Holiness has said this many times. This is why we have such an extensive library here. So John Kelton felt this was in accord with His Holiness's vision. Is because if you don't understand the views of different people, then it's very hard to teach them effectively. So we see Atisha, at the time was skilled not just in Buddhism, but in all the other fields of knowledge that were going on in India, and therefore he was able to relate to different points of view very well. So anyway, I think my point, I got a little sidetracked there, but I was saying that when we have the Bodhisattva vows, it does seem like there's an understanding that it's really important to keep this broad perspective. But it has to be done in a careful way, not to undermine your study of Buddhism. Be careful not to get so distracted with these other points of view. Atisha, I think he said to have said there are infinite fields of knowledge, but only limited time. So you have to be very careful with what you put your effort into. But provided you do it in a reasonable way, then it can be very useful. So anyway, in order to compose a text, you have to be skilled in the 5 fields of knowledge. That's 1. And deregidon yamsulembe negi damba deregidon yamsulembe negi damba yanda brazope sange ne sungde. So the deregidon is the meaning of those texts, and yamsulembe negi damba is the instructions that clarify the point of how to practice those, not just not just being skilled in them or wise in them. Knowledgeable, but also know how to put them in practice. So yandabar zupe sange ne sungte. So this lineage of instruction that stems from the Buddha, from the perfect Buddha, dampa bar mache pale. So then it goes to an unbroken lineage of worthy or noble beings. Gyupe mengak tandempa. So one has to be endowed with that lineage. The point here is that one has to have a pure lineage. One has to have. It's not just a matter of reading the Buddha's teachings, but actually having a direct lineage from one's teachers that extends back to the Buddha. And then, Yirami Lai Gel Sikne Zungi Nawatopo. And then you have to have a direct vision of the deity who gives you permission to compose it. So that's quite a lofty qualification, but that's what's understood in order to have the qualification to compose a traditional text. Like when you study Parchen, you'll see this. There's a discussion at the beginning of the Parchen about Haribhadra and why he's qualified to compose this text, Rawadamsal, and he has all of these because it said that he had a vision of Maitreya who told him he was qualified to clarify the teachings in the way that he did. And likewise with Tsongkhapa, it said, of course, he had many visions of Manjushri, but specifically there's one aspect in his biography when it says when he says himself that he first gained a good understanding of Tantra already in his mid-40s, but he didn't teach it until in his mid-50s. He started writing books about Tantra, and it seems that's because that's when Manjushri gave him permission, that it's now you're ready to start composing these texts. So those are the three causes. So all three of those, so if all three of those, if through those causes you're able to compose a text, then so if you fulfill all three of those qualifications, then it's very good. It's very excellent. So Lopon-CHEN.MO Dilani. So as for these three, Sungka Ngaho. So he was endowed with all three of them. Dela Yirangi Jesu Sungwani. So as for how he was looked after by the Yidam, right? Because it's just said you need to have a direct vision of the Yidam. So does he have that? Okay, so it says in the Dilpa, right, the praise of him by Nakso that we got through last time. Come in. You can come. Yeah. It's okay. This sit. Yeah. Actually, would you mind in the Lama.RIM.CHEN.MO section of the library, if you could just get one copy, that would be great. Thank you so much. Do you know how to get in the library? Yeah. So then we have from the praise by Nakso Lotsawa, right? So Pelden Gepe Dorje Tam. So this is talking about the different deities that he was looked after by, meaning that he had direct vision of them. So Gepe Dorje is Ke Dorje, is Hebadra. Gepe Dorje Tam, Danzik Kepe Gyapo Tam. So this is the name of a past practitioner. I forget. There's a Sanskrit. It's quite long name, so I can't say it. But Damzik Gupit Gyalpo. It's a name of one of the kings. Maybe it's one of the kings of Shambhala. I'm not actually sure. And then if you find out, let me know. And then Pao Jitenwanchuk Tong. So Pao Jitenwanchuk is Lokeshvara, is Avalokiteshvara, right? The hero Avalokiteshvara. And then Jomo Detsun Droma Sok. So then the venerable Aryatara. Shelsik Nawatopena. So he had a direct vision of all of these, and he thereby received permission to compose a text. Milam Naham Wonsundu. So either he saw them in a dream or he saw them directly. Sapatani Gache We Damshu Daktu Zimpala. So he listened to them to teachings on the Dharma from them, on the profound and extensive Dharma. So Lama Gyupala. So then we had, this was how he saw a deity. Now we're going backwards, right? We had the third cause, seeing the deity. Now we have the second cause, having the pure lineage, right? So Lama Gyupala is the lineage lamas. Tekpa Tumawatang, Tepa Chimpo Gyupani. So he had two lineages, the common vehicle, meaning the lower vehicle, and then the great vehicle. So de la paro to chimpatang sanganile. So then it later has, So actually, it should be, I think it's saying that the Mahayana has also the Paramitayana, right, the exoteric, and then the secret mantra. So as for the first, the exoteric, the Paramitayana, Dambola Tawe Gyupet, the first has the lineage of the view and then the lineage of practice. Tawe Gyupetang, Chipe Gyupeni. So Chima, and then the latter one, Tantra, has Jampane Gyupetang. Oh, sorry, not Tantra. The latter one, meaning the practice lineage, has the lineage from Maitreya, Jampene Gyupatang, Jampayane Gyupa, and the lineage from Manjushri. The Ge Gyupa Sum, all. Right, so there's the lineage of view, and then there's the two lineages of practice, one from Maitreya, one from Manjushri. So Sangha Layang, so Sangha also, Tantra further has Lup Nga. There's 5 lineages. So first of all, with the lineage of the view, that would be from Nagarjuna, right? And then we have the lineage of practice. We usually say from Maitreya to Asanga, but then I think the one of view, so the second lineage of practice that comes from Manjushri, that's probably then we're again referring to Nagarjuna, because Nagarjuna has the precious garland, which is his text, which is more focused on practice than the other ones. And then that's said to be the precursor of Shantideva's text, Bodhisattva Charyavatara, that was based heavily on precious garland. So that would be perhaps the view of the practice lineage that's stemming from Manjushri. So then with Tantra, then we have the five lineages of Tantra. So I'll look in the footnote here actually, because this is a bit complicated. The 5 lineages of Tantra. We have the explanation by Kunkin Jamyan Shepa from Gomong. So he lists the 5 lineages as, first there's the lineage of all Tantra, just in general, and then the Aguya Samaya lineage, Samaja lineage, and then the lineage of Mother Tantra. So Aguya Samaja is Father Tantra, and then Mother Tantra, like Chakrasambhara. And then the action in Yoga Tantra, so the lower Tantras, and then the lineage of Yamari, which is the Yamantaka lineage, Shinjeshe. So that's one enumeration of the 5. And then we have Akya. Forget. So Akya has the first as the secret lineage of all secret Tantra, so this is similar. And that includes with performance along with action tantras in the 4th lineage. So he gives a slightly different enumeration is all. This is based on a different source. But it seems like it's basically the same. So we have, of course, the Gelug, we have those 5 lineages that we see in the Lama Tsongkhapa merit field, but that's different because that's the Gelug lineage of Tantra that Tsongkhapa received. But this here is what Atisha had received. So he had the lineage of Mother, Father Tantra, basically, and then also Yamantakar, which is sometimes included in Father Tantra, but here it's separated out. And then action and Yoga Tantra, the lower Tantras. So he had all of those lineages that he received. Remember last time we talked about how as a young person he was studying Tantra for quite a while before he became a monk. So then we have Zhenyang, Drupe Gyupa Tang. So then the Drupe Gyupa, the lineage of the tenet systems, and the different schools of tenets. And then Jinlapki Gyupa, the lineage of blessings. And Damba Natsope Gyupa, the lineage of the assorted instructions. La Sopa, Gyupa Dumatan Denching. So he's endowed with many different lineages of practice. And that was, and then Ngosu Senpei Lamani, so the teachers from whom he directly received the lineage, Dupale, Dr. Tempe Lamani, so the lamas that he always relied on, Shantipa Tang Serlingpa. So the Shantipa, then Serlingpa, and a Bhadra Bodhi Zanashri. So he's just listing the names of the different teachers. Of course, Serlingpa we talked about before, then Shantipa also is a quite important teacher in India. We have some of his texts in Parchin. We studied 2 of his texts. And then Bodhibhadra and Janashri. We don't have a lot of their texts that we read regularly. Bodhibhadra, Dantrip Sampo, and then Mondrup Topa Mampotang. So then he also they have many siddhas basically, many mahasiddhas that he was relying on, and Ekepardini Ludrubne. So especially though is from Nagarjuna, the lineage. Chikne Chiktu Gyupahi Sapatani Gache. So the one by one, like the one teacher to disciple going on the generations, the extensive and the profound, Damba Kyola Ngawayan. So you were endowed with those lineages. So it's like that. So Ngodru Topa Tope Lama Chuni. So he Yoba Drakpa. So it was renowned that he had 12 teachers who would attain the profound realization. Drakshing Shenyal Mango. So other than that, he also had many more. There's just 12 specifically that are singled out. So then we went backwards again. So we get back to the first cause. Rikpe ne ngala kepa. So the way that he was skilled in the 5 systems of knowledge. She Sindo. So we've already talked about that. We talked about that earlier when we last time about his what he studied in India. So de chir. So lopondi gawe gompa lekpa temple nuso. So therefore he was able to correctly ascertain the intention of the Buddha. De tabu lopondi la. So this teacher he had gagar kache ugyen belbo punamna loponangi sangi mikapashik yu kyang. So ni Gagana Jootang Kempa Nyampe Pandita Chempo Pito Parna Umasenge Sainipo Shi. Yeah, so it's saying I think there's 4 main teachers, but those names I don't recognize in Tibetan, so I have to look in here. Hold on. So actually, it's talking about his students. So Lopon Di La. It doesn't, as we see in Tibetan. Oftentimes the list is not clarified till the end of what it's about, right? But here we have Lopon Di La Gyagar Kache Ugyen Pelpo Dunamna Lopmanam, right? So his students Samgimi Kappa Shikyokya. So that's a list of places. Like so, we have Kache. Like Kache is Kashmir. And then Ugyen is Oriana. And then Pelpo in this case is talking about Nepal. Right? So in those, and in Pu, in Tibet. So in those 4 places, he had inconceivable disciples. But the main one, so in India, Jotang, Kempa, Nyampe, so the person whose understanding was equal to his. Pandita, Chempo, Bodiwa. So Bidopa. So I'll just read it in English. It's a lot easier than trying to read the Sanskrit. In the Tibetan phoneticization. So then we had Dharma Kamarati, Madhya Sinha, and Kshitigarba. They're all equal in knowledge to him. And also others include Mitra Guya as the 5th. And then we get into Tibetan. So Ngari ne Lotsawar Rinchen Zangpo. Some of you might know he was a very important translator early on. Lotsawar Rinchen Zangpo was his student. And then Nakso Lotsawa, we mentioned before. And then Lama Tsongkhapa, we talked about, the prince who invited him. And then Tsangne, so that's from Ngari in West Tibet. And then we have Tsang, also West Tibet, but not quite as far west as Ngari. Gar Gewata, Gu Kukpa, Go Kupa Letse, right? So he was the Go Kupa Letse, that's Go Lotsawa, is Go Kupa Letse. One of the great translators. And then Hlodrak-ne, so from Hlodrak in southern Tibet, this is where Marpa is from, Hlodrak. Chakpatri Choktang Gewakyong. So these are the names of the disciples here. And then from Kham in eastern Tibet, Naldrapa-Chempo, so the great yogi. And Gumbawa you might know, is very famous, one of the Kadapa masters. And then Sherap Dorje, Chagdar Tunpa. And then from U, so in Lhasa area, Kungok Dromsung. Right, so Ku Lotsawa, Ngok Lotsawa, and Dromtopa, right, Dromtopa Gyalwijungne. So that was considered his main disciple, that last one. But yeah, Ngok Lotsawa, Loden Sherap, it might be referring to his uncle, yeah, Ku. Let me see if it clarifies in here. Because there was 2 Ngok, right? Ngok is the family name, and Loden Sherap was the latter one. But he was after, I think, he was at the same time of Atisha, so it might very well be him. Let's see. No, it is Ngok Lepe Sherap. So that was the uncle. Ngok Lepe Sherap was the uncle, and then the nephew was Ngok Loden-Sherap, who was the translator of obviously Maya Lamkara and a lot of the Parchin literature, so he's quite important. And then Kudlotsao was Kudun Tsundra Yundrung, and so he was also a translator that we sometimes see because Tsongkhapa negates his views, but that's just common with a lot of the early ones. It doesn't mean that Tsongkhapa thought he was a bad translator. Oftentimes it just means that it was one point where he had disagreed with him, so that's what he highlights. So Deraki Nanekyang. So among all of those, then Lama Niki Trinle Gipar Chepe Gyudzin Chimponi. So the great holder of the lineage who broadly spread the activities of the teacher, of the Lama Atisha, Drome Lung Tempes, the one who was prophesied by Tara, was Dromdompa Gyalwa Jumneso, who I think a lot of you know. Just briefly, in case you don't, he was a layperson. I never quite understood, why he didn't take monastic ordination, because I believe he did. He was a Sangchu Genyan, meaning he was celibate layperson, as far as I understand. He took vows of celibacy, but I'm not sure why. Maybe because, as I mentioned, Atisha didn't give any ordination in Tibet, but I'm not sure if that's the reason. But yeah, he's considered the one who then founded the Karam school, which is based on Atisha's teachings, and is also in Tibet considered to be of the same mind stream of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Right? He later was said to incarnate as Gyalwa Gindenjuk, the first Dalai Lama. So Derakni. So that as for those ones, Zepapo Chewa. So that what I've described up to here was a brief explanation of the greatness of the teacher, of the author of this text. Gepar namtak yigi chemo namsu sheparchao. So if you want to know it extensively, then it's good you can read all the extensive biographies. But fortunately, these days we have a biography right here in English. I think James Apple did it. He's done a lot of things on Atisha, and it's this Lives of the Masters series, which is an excellent series that Snow Line has been putting out. So they put out a number of very extensive scholarly works on different Buddhist masters. So one of them is Tsongkhapa by Thupten Jinpa. That's an outstanding book. And we have a number of others, and one of them is this one on Atisha that we have up there on the shelf, which I hope to read soon. Actually, it would be very nice to get a more broad picture. And what's good about these, like with Tsongkhapa, when one with Thupten Jinpa, is there's many biographies of Tsongkhapa, at least 20, 30 ones that are reputable, but he takes all of them put together and then summarizes it. So there's actually nothing like that in Tibetan, and they've now back translated it into Tibetan. I saw this up at the bookshop here. I was about to buy the book, and then I realized it was a translation of this book in English, so there's no real need for us to buy it. Because it's more extensive than any of the Tibetan biographies. It combines all of them. So I expect it's similar with the biography of Atisha. He probably takes all these different biographies that were available and whatever other anecdotes there were other places. Anyway, so we have Chiki Chewa, right? So first we had Zepapo Chewa, right? The greatness of the teacher. So now we have the greatness of the Dharma itself, the text itself. So Chuni Damgak Di Zhong. So the text of this instruction is Jandut Lam Gidronme, right? The lamp for the path to enlightenment. Jo Zepe Shung Mampo Yukyang. So although he composed many texts, right? We have, although this is the one that we know best, there are a number of other texts, and we have a translation of several of them in the library. This Jesuit priest, actually, I think Richard Sherpa, he translated a lot of Atisha's works. So we have a book there. We also have his complete works in the library. So they had many texts, but Sawa Tabu, so the one that was like the root text, Yonsu Zopani, so and it was complete and the root. It had everything together was this text, Lamdrum. Yinte, Dongak Niki Ne Du Ne, so it combined all the points of both sutra and mantra. Tempe Chucha Yonsu Zopatan, so all the different things that the Buddha taught. Sen Due Rinpa, and then put it in stages in terms of how to pacify your mind. So it's not just intellectual knowledge, and it's not unclear how it fits together. It's all in terms of how you pacify your mind. So chepe. So it's done mainly in that way. Lak du long dewatang. So it's easy to put into practice. Shingda Chenpo Niki Lukla Kepe Lama Niki Dampe Gienpe. So it's ornamented by the instructions of the two lamas who were skilled in the lineages or the traditions of the two great trailblazers. So the two great trailblazers are Atisha, Nagarjuna, and Asanga. All right. So Nagarjuna for the profound lineage of emptiness, and then Asanga for the vast lineage. And then the two lamas are Atisha's two main lamas who taught him that. So I mentioned this before. Vidya Kokila was his main teacher for the profound lineage, stemming from Nagarjuna and then to turn to Kirti. So you'll see him in there's Vidya Kokila, the elder, and the younger in the lineage prayer. And then for the extensive lineage, then there was Selingpa that we talked about before. So those are the two lamas that it is talking about here. So it's ornamented with their teachings. And that's what we study here, right? You might know there's the prayer. We recite it at Chura every night. I don't know if you know the lineage prayer, the Jitsun Sogyalma, right? So there's that the second to last verse, right? Which we also recite at the end of Chura. At the end of the Chura prayers, there's a last verse that the Umze recites very slowly. And there's three of them, and he alternates night by night. So one of them is the Shingta Chenpo Yinyin Yonchaki, Shunlo Lope Rimpe Dratsamje. You know that? So that was a pair, I think it was composed with the second Dalai Lama for Sera J. And it says Shingta Chenpo Yinyin Yonchaki. So the place where they study the system of the two great trailblazers. So that's understood to be continued here, this same tradition. So Shenle Kepara Papao. So it's thereby, it is superior to other systems of practice. So Shungde Damaki Chewalashi. Okay, so we had that the text itself is excellent, but now the subject matter, the instructions that it teaches, are also excellent. And there's 4 ways in which they're excellent. So that's the Tempa Tamche Gyalme de Dopa Dope Chewa. Sungat Tamche Dangaktu Chawe Chewa. And a Gawe Sungap Gori Gompa de Laktu Niepe Chewa. And Nature Tamche Rangaksu Drowe Chewa. So the Chewa Shi, these are important. You see this quoted as the 4 greatnesses. So the 4 greatnesses of the Lama teachings. Right, so Tempa Tamche Gyalme de Dope Chewa. So the point is, if you understand the Lama, then you have these 4. Tempa Tamche Gyalme de Dope Chewa is that you understand all of the teachings as non-contradictory, right? You don't think that the Buddha taught this and that, and those contradict each other, so one is right, one is wrong. You understand how they all fit together. And then we have Sungap Tamche Damlak Tu Shawa Chewa, right? So all the teachings appear as practice, as personal practice. It's not just intellectual knowledge. And then Gyawe Gomba de Latu Niepe Chewa. So you easily find or ascertain the intention of the Buddha's teachings, because you can understand every teaching, what was the context and what was the point of what he was saying, based on this broad understanding. And then Yepa Tamche Rangaksu Drowe Chewa. So then naturally the great fault doesn't occur, or it ceases. I mean, the great fault means to abandon the Dharma, that you won't think that one particular teaching that the Buddha did teach and is actually beneficial, you won't reject it and say this is useless, which is a great fault, because that creates very heavy negative karma. So first of all, Tempa Tamche Gyalme de Dope Chewa, Dambo. So Tempa Ni, so as for the teaching, Shera Drome Gache Drowa. So the great commentary on Shera Drome. So Shera Drome, right, the Pratita, what is it? Yeah, you know in Sanskrit, Shera Drome, Pratita. Bodhi. Well, that not the lamp for the path to. Yeah, you're right though. Yeah, Bodhi. Shera. Yeah. So the great, the lamp clarifying wisdom, right? So Bodhi Pratipa. So this was the Bhagavad-viveka, right? His commentary. It was nice to see that we Tsongkhapa quotes these, right? Because we know that in terms of the view of emptiness, Tsongkhapa rejected Mahaviveka's criticism of Chandrakirti, and so he's often the opponent. But at the same time, he's considered one of the greatest scholars of India, and Tsongkhapa does quote him at times as an authoritative source, and His Holiness Dalai Lama also has taught on his text before. So we have the Sera Drome and then the Gache Drawa, the great commentary on it by Chenri Ziktushuk. So that's what Avalokrata, something like that in Sanskrit, you know? Chenri Zik Avalokitra. Huh? Chenri Ziktushuk. So the Avalokita Vrata, that's his name. So he wrote this extensive commentary on Bhavaviveka, the Sera Drome Gache Drawa. So the commentary is said to be very methodical to the point of being a bit boring. But it as a result, it's very detailed about every single word. What is the meaning? So we have Tempa Shechawa. What is it teaching? Tempa Shechawa ni La Tami Dutsi Gopong Topar Dupa Nam. So all those people who want to achieve the state of the state, the nectar-like state of a god or a human, right? Yongsu Shepa Chawa. So Yongsu Shepa Chawa is thoroughly know the truth of suffering, right? The thing that you must know is the truth of suffering. And then Pawar Chawa, the thing you must abandon, is the truth of the origin of suffering. And then Ngondu Chawa, the thing you must actualize, the truth of cessation. And then Gombar Chawa, the thing you must meditate on, is the path. Dakla Chinjima Lopar Tumpa. So it teaches those unmistakably. Tumpa Te, so this is giving an etymology of teaching, of the word teaching. Chomden Degi Sungra Shechawayino. So it means the teaching of the Buddha. Right? I mean, it's translated as teaching in English. It is correct. The word Tempa in Tibetan doesn't have any particular connotation of having to be a Buddhist teaching per se, but it's usually taken that way, right? That here it's talking about Tempa as the teaching of the Buddha, not just something, because the word Tempa just means that which was taught, but it's specifically meaning the teaching of the Buddha. So so as it was said, Gyewe Lekper Shepa Jinyepaho. So as many good sayings as there are of the Buddha, those are teachings. So De Tamche Gyewa Mepatopani, so that's what we did. Depa Tamche Gyame de Dopacho, the greatness of realizing them all is non-contradictory. So we defined Tempa, teaching, now we have Gyame de Dopa. What does it mean to realize them non-contradictory? So dear, in this context, Gansak Chik Sangawe Lam to Goate. So it's a way, what it means here is that you understand them as a path for one particular person to achieve enlightenment. Right? It's not like this teaching was for one person, this teaching is for a different person. They're all teachings for anybody who wants to achieve enlightenment if they're done in the right order. So they on Kachik ni Langitso, Kachik ni Langian Lak Chigripagyurbaho. So Kachik is like some of the teachings. Some of the teachings are the main path, and some of them are the branches of the path. But they're all related in some way. So Dela Janda Sempa Nangi Shedoni, so the heartfelt wish of all bodhisattvas is Chiktendi Don Drupa Yenla, right? Is to achieve the welfare of the world. Right? Although again, those of you in Parchin, right? Yinter Shiwatsonam Kunshi Niki Nichizingang Yintang, Jola Pempar Chenam, Lamshi Niki Zepagang, right? So the ones who wish to benefit the world is talking about the bodhisattvas. Drupa Yenla, Dulcha Yam, so as for the students also, right? Rikchen Sumka, Jesus in Gupe, they also, students who train in this, trainees, have to look after people of all three, dispositions, all three, lineage holders, but it's like people who have the particular proclivities for either Hira path, the solitary realizer path, or the bodhisattva path. So even if you might be a bodhisattva yourself, you have to be able to teach people based on their proclivity. So you have to know all the different teachings. You can't just know the bodhisattva teachings. So so therefore they need to train in all of those. So as it says in Janja Semdra, right, this is Nagarjuna's text, Bodhicitta Vivarana, I think. Rani Ngejin Shendakla, so oneself, as you yourself has ascertained it, Ngepa Kepa Dubahi Tatu Trua Meperni, So those who wish to also generate correct ascertainment without mistake, Kiena Radu Jukpayan. So they always enter into that. Like all great scholars, all great practitioners, they enter into that activity, not just for your own understanding, but the way that you've understood it, you also try to generate that understanding in others. Nisheta is a namdril, right? Semanamdril. This is chapter 2 of Semanamdril. So Tapjung Degu Kogirpa Deche Pani Kawayin. This is we quote this one a lot in debate, right? So Tabjung Degu Kogirpa, as with most of Dharmakirti's works, it's pretty much impossible to understand what it says unless you have a commentary. So Tabjung is that which comes from the method, which means the result, the result of enlightenment, or it really the result. Here it's talking about the Four Noble Truths, right? Because Dharmakirti is talking about how to really be able to teach the Four Noble Truths, because he's talking about how the Buddha is an authentic teacher, right? That's what chapter 2 is about. And so it's saying that if somebody does not themselves have the realization, then they can't properly teach it to others. So Tapjung in this case is talking about direct perception of selflessness that one achieves through meditation on the Four Noble Truths, and one achieves the path of seeing. So you achieve Tapjung. So Degu Kogirpa. So when the causes are obscure, Kogir, right? They're not accessible to you, meaning that you don't have a direct perception of them. That's what it's talking about here. So because we say, like the Jepak Sema, the inferential cognition, it accesses its object through inference in a hidden manner. It does not have direct experience of it. So Degu Kogirpa Deche Pani Kawa. And then it's very difficult to teach it if it's obscure to you. She Sungde, so Rangi Jitawa Shin Mangina. So if you yourself do not ascertain it as it is, Shin the Devaminu Bejiro, then you can't teach others. Now there's different ways to understand this. So as I just said, we generally understand it in this context to be talking about the direct perception. And that seems to be what Dharmakirti is emphasizing here, but in a more general sense, it doesn't mean you can't teach until you have a direct perception, but you shouldn't really be teaching until you really understand it. There's often a bit of a rush to get, to be teaching things. And in the West, we're used to having, you go to university for 4 years and you're educated. So we hear somebody was in the monastery for 4 years, he must be an expert on Buddhism. But we see when we get here that it takes a long time to really get an understanding of these things. So until you have some stable understanding of it, it can be problematic to teach about it. But then, of course, as I say, Dharmakirti, he's saying really having the direct perception is best. So then we have a lot of debate about this, right? Like we talk about Lopaninian, right? Vasubandhu, who in the tradition is not understood to have had direct understanding of emptiness, or even a correct understanding of emptiness. Chandakirti singles him out among 3 people. Who is this passage? His Holiness often quotes it. It's there. It's at the very end of the auto commentary on Umalajukpa, on Madhyamakavatara. So Chandakirti's saying that that there are others who, although they tried very hard, they did not come to comprehend the teachings of the Buddha. And then in the auto commentary, he singles out Dharma. What's his name? Dharmapala, and then Vasubandhu, and then Dignaga, those 3. And so, but the way he says it, right? He wouldn't directly say it, but so he has like a opponent saying, because he just said that there are others that don't understand emptiness, and then saying, but are you saying that these great scholars, these great renowned practitioners like Dharmapala, like Vasubandhu, like Dignaga, are you saying that they didn't have a correct ascertainment? He says, De Kedu Mao. He says, I would say so. So the understanding is that he didn't have that understanding of emptiness, and thereby certainly didn't have a direct perception of it. But we study. He's one of the great texts that we study, right? We have the 5 great texts, and one of them is Abhidhammakosha by Vasubandhu. So we debate, well, is he even a valid teacher? So that some people take it as it depends on what subject you're talking about. So in terms of the subject matter talked about in Abhidhamma Kosha, he's very valid. He understood it very thoroughly. You wouldn't take him as a teacher for Madhyamaka philosophy, but in terms of that particular branch of the Buddhist teachings, he can be considered a qualified teacher. So Tepa Sumgi Lam Shepa Ni. So as for knowing the paths of the three vehicles, right? The solitary realizer, hearer, and bodhisattva. Jonda Sempe Shedon Drukjiki Tap. It's the method for achieving what their wished for aim of the benefit of the world. Right. So this again, we'll be quoting two texts here from Parchen. You spend a lot of time on this in the Young Dakta in the first year of Parchen. It's a Mapampa, that's Maitreya, right? Ajita. I just said this before. Jola Pemperchena Lamshi Niki Jiktin Dundur Zepagang. So that's the second line of Ngondukan, right? Of Abhisamaya Lamkara. So the ones who wish to benefit the world, then through the knower of paths, meaning knowing the three paths of the three vehicles, then they achieve the aims of the world. And then also in the Gyawa Yum, which is the 25,000 verse Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, right? The mother it's called here, the mother of the conquerors. Janda Sempa Namgini, Nentikilam Dangibatang, Rang Sangikilam Dangibatang, Sangikilam Dangibalam Tamche Kipper Chashing, Lam Tamche Shipper Chow. Tera Kyang Yosu Zipper Chashing, Deraki Lamki Chawa Yang Chala. See, we said this so many times in debate, this passage, that it sticks in the mind, I guess. So all bodhisattvas, they should know all paths. They should know all paths of hearers, all paths of solitary realizers, and all paths of Buddhas. Right? It means bodhisattva paths. But it doesn't just say no. They should generate all paths. And they should know them. So this is understood in our tradition anyway. I say our tradition, actually, it's a Sera J tradition. There are the different dratsangs, there are different opinions about this, but that in all cases you generate these paths in your mind stream. So a bodhisattva doesn't just, like Gyaltsab J puts it, it's not like you're looking at an external object with your eyes. You're not looking at the hearer path and then you understand it so you can teach them. You actually generate that path in your own experience, and then you can teach it properly. Dera Kyang Yonsu Zopar Chashing. So also they complete those paths. They don't just have a basic understanding. They go through the entire path. And they they do all the activities of that. But of course it goes on to say, which is not quoted here, but they don't actualize the final end of the path. Meaning that that's why it's a yandak ta before. This is the section that we study this in. You understand the path broadly, you actualize all of the realizations of it, except that you don't actually the final realization, which would be to achieve nirvana, and then pass into remainless nirvana. So that's what you want to avoid as the bodhisattva. But beyond that, you want to have a complete understanding of the path and experience of it. So She Sungpe, so it said that's what's been said. So Tekpa Chenpo cheers. So for the purpose, Tekpa Chenpo wa yinpe cheer. Sorry, because one is a Mahayanist. Tekpa Chenpo wa yinpe cheer. Tekpeki denula lapar mi chao shemawani. So those who say, because I'm a Mahayanist, I don't need to train in the teachings of the lower vehicle. Gyewe dakso. Gyewe dak. It's a geldak, right? It's a contrary reason. So Janda Sempa Chichen. Tekpeki denula lap megober tel tekpa chenpo yimbe isn't a gyelkya. Right? It's a contrary pervasion. If one is a bodhisattva, it follows that one should not train in the Hinayana path because one is a Mahayanist. Well, the pervasion is the opposite. You must train in the lower path because you're a Mahayanist. So Tekpa Chenpo Lama Jupala. So in order to enter into the Mahayana path, Lam Tuma Watan Tuma Mawaim Bani Yola. So there's the common and the uncommon. So Tumawani, the common one, is Tekpa Mengi Denune Jumanam. So it's all the things that come from the Hinayana vehicle, the Hinayana Pitaka, right? The teachings. The Yinpe Dera Dorcha Kalakur. So how could that possibly be something that you abandon if that's the common path that you need to train in? So Okay, so Dena, so therefore, Rani Chikpo Shita Donyala Sope Mixel Chengashik. This is what I was just saying before, right? That you don't, there's some things. So there's a few specific things. Ran Chikpo Shide. So for just myself, achieving personal peace and happiness, right? Meaning solitary nirvana. Donyala Sopo. So that kind of intention, that wish to achieve that. So they mixelchen. So just a few special things. Gare mato. So except for those few things, tamche tekpa chempo wakyan yamsalan gupe. So everything else the bodhisattva, the Mahayanist, must practice. Janzen namgi shindu gepe denule. So from the very vast teachings of the Bodhisattva Pitaka, tekpa sumka gache tompe gyunsen yang de yino. So that's the reason why that you must have there's broad teachings on all of the three vehicles within the Bodhisattva teachings. Okay, so yeah, maybe we can finish here for the week, right? Zhenyang. So yeah, it's a new idea. So we'll leave it at that. And then if anyone has any questions, it'd be good. Yeah, go ahead.
I have three questions.
Yeah.
I'd love to take advantage of the presence of somebody who really knows.
Oh yeah.
So just to check if the Sera Drenme is the Prajna Pratipa. So the Sera is Prajna and then Pratipa is the lamp, right? So yeah, okay. That and then the other was it seems that the Damtse Kupe Gyalpo is an intermediate name. You have the short form Damtse Kupa, and Kupa is Vyuha, right?
Yeah.
Vyuha, right? So you have Samaya Vyuha, but more often it's Tri Samaya Vyuha. So the three Damtse, right?
Yeah.
So that is Tri Samaya Vyuha, and in the long form, that would be Tri Samaya Vyuha Raja, right? The Gyalpo.
Yeah,
Raja.
the king. Yeah.
So Tri Samaya Vyuha Raja Shata Kshara Sadhanam. It seems to be Derge 504.
Means it's in the text.
Yeah, in the Derge.
There's a text. There's a text by him. You mean?
Well, this is the name also of a text.
Oh, it's the name of a text.
Yes,
it's not the name of a person.
It's the name of a text. This Tri Samaya Vyuha is Derge 504.
But because you see, I mean, it was talking about the people that he saw that he received permission from, right? So here in the English, you have that same name that you have here, right? Due to having visions and receiving permission from the glorious Hevadra and a Tri Samaya Viharaja, the noble here. So it sounds like a person in that case. He received permission from him. There's no footnote here. They don't explain what it is.
Could it be that this Tri Samaya Viharaja Shatakakshara Sadhanam means he who has realized sadhanam,
sadhana is meditation.
So he who has realized that sadhana, that practice, right?
Yeah,
that's theoretically possible.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's meditation. Sadhana is meditation. It's Sanskrit also.
It says in the footnote that it's one of the deities, right? He had the deities Tara, Avalokiteshvara, Achala, and then Tri Samaya. So it sounds like a deity in the Chakra Sambhara and Hebadra.
Yes. It says here it's beginning the action class. Right?
It must be an action class. Yeah, I bet if we look in the Lama Tsongkhapa merit field, there's the action class deities, right? We can check the key there.
Yeah.
And see if it might be one of those deities.
And then we can note Derga 504. That would be the sadhana for that.
That would be the sadhana for it. Okay,
yeah.
It's not like the root tantra of it because it's a Kagya text, right?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, it's probably the root tantra of that deity.
Probably.
And
okay, thanks for your help. I would not have wanted to come with these things.
No,
I don't. Yeah, the Sanskrit I have to rely on you. I don't know anything about Sanskrit.
So my question was again,
Yeah.
What is different between LAM.RIM.CHEN.MO?
Okay, so LAM.RIM.CHEN.MO, all right, Chewa.
Yeah.
So LAM.RIM.CHEN.MO is this text, right? This particular text that he composed, and the LAM.RIM.DRING is another text.
Okay, the concept are same or
what?
The concept.
It's very similar. I'll explain in just a minute what the differences of them are, and then LAM.RIM.CHEN.MO can mean two things. So The Lam.RIM.CHEN.MO that I just mentioned, the middle length Lam.RIM, there's this section on that, on insight. And that's often called Lakdong Chungu, the small section on insight, right? As compared to Lakdong Cheo, which is the large section on insight here. And sometimes, for short, they just call it the Lam.RIM.CHEN.MO. So then that becomes the short Lam.RIM. But then so you have the short and the long. But then if you divide it into three, then it's different. So the Chewa is this, the Dring is that middle one, and the Chungo is the Nyamgyur, Lam.RIM Nyamgyur, the song of experience. There's also a Lam.RIM Dordu, the condensed Lam.RIM. So that's just a 20-something verse text by Tsongkhapa that condenses all the points of Lam.RIM. But in terms of the Chewa and the Dring, right? The Chewa was one of the first major texts he composed after his realization of emptiness. So he was 44 when he composed it. And what's unique about this text is the amount of detail. So he goes through all the different views that were common in the time, because he's establishing his own view. He's establishing his unique view that now that he's had this realization, which is quite different from his earlier text in Sertring, where it was kind of still uncertain about what view he was presenting. It would at least appear that way. But then here it's like I've come to this certainty about this is the view, and so he presents all these different views that were present in Tibet and in India, and goes through different puts the Gache, like such person said this. So it's very useful for understanding all of the background. And personally, this is what I said in the first day. I find it the most helpful. Just I like to think about things a lot, I guess, and know kind of all the different points of it. The Lam.RIM.CHEN.MO, he was one of the last texts he wrote, just a couple of years before he passed away, which it takes a lot of the same points, but makes it much more streamlined for practice, without all these, this person says this, person says this, and just makes it kind of, how do you practice this? But also in the section on emptiness, there are some unique points, because his presentation of emptiness evolved a bit, even after he had that realization over 20 years. So they had said that I mentioned also there's the 5 great texts on emptiness that he composed, and it's considered one is Lakdong.CHEN.MO in here, and then Lakdong.CHEN.MO and Lam.RIM.CHEN.MO. It's considered another text on emptiness because he presents quite some new ways of presenting the understanding.
And my second question is, we go through this, especially in Sutrayana. We practice on Lam.RIM. And Tantrayana, I think they practice on Lam.RIM.CHEN.MO.
That's right. Yeah.
So what is different?
Yeah.
If the Lam.RIM.CHEN.MO, those who are practicing Tantra, if they go through this Lam.RIM.CHEN.MO, especially this Lam.RIM.CHEN.MO. Okay. I think there is Lam.RIM.CHEN.MO and Lam.RIM.CHEN.MO.
Yeah, there's Lam.RIM.CHEN.MO is a different text.
So those who are practicing Tantra, they practice, they go through that.
I mean, that's so. And the understanding is, it's like it's all kind of built in the same system. We have Tsongkhapa's system of practice, and it's understood that he was under the understanding that people who are going to practice his teaching fully will eventually practice Tantra. As I said in the first day also, of his 18 volumes of collected works, 12 of them are about Tantra. So there's more books about Tantra that he wrote than about Sutra. Even though, as I just said at the beginning today, that it wasn't until he was in his mid-50s that he started composing them, but he was very prolific after that. There's very little about Tantra in Lam.RIM.CHEN.MO, but there's a few hints about it. And they say one is that he puts the section on Guru devotion as the first section of the text, right? That's understood to be preparing someone for the importance of the relationship with the teacher in Tantra. And emphasizing, although His Holiness also says that part of the reason for doing that is it's something that he hadn't covered as much in his earlier works. So like the Four Noble Truths and Bodhicitta and so forth, there's a lot about that in Sertring, which you wrote earlier, but he hadn't commented a lot on the relationship with the Guru. But at the same time, it's understood that's why it's first in the text. So even though you're approaching the teachings, with this graded manner, still there's this emphasis at the very beginning on developing a proper relationship with the teacher. And at the very end of the text, you'll notice it's just one page. He says, once you've understood these teachings well, then you can practice Tantra, that's all. But it's definitely encouraging you to do so. So then the Lam.RIM.CHEN.MO is, taking the same idea and presenting the mantra path in that way. So that's what we study, now the Geshes, right? They finish at Gyuto Gyume, they come back to Sera and they study Ngakrim-CHEN.MO for 1 year. So, that's just a way of codifying the Tantric teachings in the same way that he's done here with the Sutra teachings. But in a way, it's not just Ngakrim-CHEN.MO. He had a lot of. So the other main one is Rimna Seldrum, the clarification, lamp clarifying the 5 stages, right? So when they go to Gyuto Gyume, they study Rimna Seldrum, and they come back here and they study Ngakrim-CHEN.MO.
And my next question is, Lama Tsongkhapa, he mentioned about hell, like how do you feel when someone is born into hell, and a lot of fire and darkness, many things is there. And I saw many Rinpoches there. I watched their teachings, and they say it's a state of mind, like really not necessary to born into hell. So hell is still exist, or it's the state of mind? What's that exactly?
That's a very good question, right? So I think there's different ways to approach it, and one can go to either extreme, right? So when we talk about hell, a lot of people there also have a quite, understandably, a negative reaction to it. And it's like, for one thing, so one extreme would just be to adopt the ancient Indian worldview of how the world is, right? But that's problematic in a number of ways. His Holiness has said that this view of Mount Mirror with the center of the universe, we can safely say that probably isn't there. And he says we need to
that link sheet kind of.
Yeah, the 4 continents and so forth. He basically says, look, we can look with a telescope, we don't see it. And if he says, Holiness has said very clearly, if science contradicts, and it's not just science, but evidence contradicts the traditional teachings, then we need to go with the evidence. We can't just say this is the tradition. So one extreme would be to just say, well, it says that, and therefore it's all true, which sometimes we can see that happening. The other extreme is to say, well, that doesn't make any sense, or I don't like it, or I think also because some people, maybe not for you so much, I don't know, because your family background is Buddhist, right? Your parents were practicing Buddhist, but a lot of people in the West, they come from Christian backgrounds where there's this talk of hell in a way that's not very helpful for your understanding. It's like if you don't believe, you're going to go to hell. And so there's like a wish to get away from that and feeling like, oh, is it just saying I have to believe that again now, that there's this place for the non-believers to go. So that's understandable that one wouldn't want to adopt that kind of point of view. But then the other extreme is then to say, well, therefore, all these teachings are just provisional. They're not meant to be taken literally. So there is the understanding of the 6 realms of existence as being like a state of mind. It talks about this in Lotus Sutra, right? It's in the Buddhist teachings itself.
It's a state of mind.
Yeah. But I think, one way to see it is that it could be both, right? It's like, if the talk about karma is that one's experience, one's world that one is born into is a reflection of one's state of mind. So if there's that state of mind, there's going to be that experience. But I often, if people ask me about this, you've been practicing longer, but when beginners ask me about this, my answer is that it's a big step, it's a big leap to go from, say, a scientific materialist viewpoint to then saying there's hell. It's like you have to have a lot of steps in between. So first of all, is mind separate phenomenon from the brain? That's a much more fundamental question.
I read some Pali Sutras, and Buddha also mentioned about it because he's learned and he realized when someone is coming to Buddha, listen his teaching. Buddha, he
understood.
To tell him where he born.
Yeah.
He lived in hell.
Yeah.
So what's that? He born in hell? Like hell is it's a place or just?
Well, I'll address your point in just a moment because that's a good question. But the point I'm making first is just that it's like if we want to say hell exists, we have to take a lot of steps there. It's like if we can establish the mind is separate from the brain, that's one thing. If we can establish that thereby it reincarnates, that's a second thing. If we can then establish that there are existences to be reincarnated in beyond just human existence, it's like it requires a lot of And then also that hell implies that there's beings who are not embodied in a gross physical form. There's a lot of things that kind of make up that worldview that require a lot of analysis before we just blanketly accept it, right? So I think that it's something to take in stages and like think about what are the implications of this, rather than because if we just quickly switch the worldview without a lot of analysis, it's not a very stable, understanding. It's very subject to then. Therefore, you change back when you feel emotional about that particular viewpoint. But yeah, in terms of what it says in the teachings, that's important to take into account, right? Because there are some people who would say, "Oh, this wasn't taught by the Buddha; it was a later accretion." But that doesn't seem to me to be the case by any means. That it's very clear in many of the traditional sutra teachings, and many of the ones that are generally accepted by almost all scholars as being the authentic teachings of the historical Buddha, where he meets people and he says, "Yeah, this person was born in this place," or "This person will be born in this place." It seems like a quite central aspect of the teaching, rather than like a later accretion. And it's understood that when we think about if there is such a thing as reincarnation, and there is this infinite succession of lives, there's going to be many different states of existence. So whether there's a place where you're literally born into a fire and people are torturing you all day, but there are definitely places, even in the human realm, that are quite serious levels of suffering beyond what most of us would imagine. So we could imagine there could be something worse. There could be, a world where things are much worse than in this world, and people are just suffering, or beings, whatever kind of being is there, is suffering a long time. But yeah, this is why I was saying before about studying a lot of different things. For me, it's very helpful. Like reading the LAM.RIM.CHEN.MO, as opposed to just reading a section that says there's hell, you read a lot more about the viewpoint, but also looking at a lot of different ways of understanding this. Like, I don't know of any particular scientific accounts of hell per se, but there are scientific investigations into the existence of ghosts, which would be a pretty good parallel, because that's also an understanding in Buddhism. So if you're interested, I think it's definitely worthwhile to look at those and see, does this make sense, and how does this work with our current understanding of the world? Can it fit into, without just discarding scientific understanding? Is it possible that these things could actually fit into it if we recognize both sides need to give a little bit, but like we don't just adopt the traditional Indian viewpoint, but we also don't just blindly accept scientific materialism. Both of them might have something to offer, and we can build a more refined worldview on that basis.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
And, if you have time, just my last question.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I'm talking about inter-meditation state after we say Bardo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I heard that if someone is Bardo stage, intermediate stage, and if he's going to born in hell, if we are praying for him like every 7
yeah.
So we can purify his negative karma, and he will born into the good will.
Yeah.
Is that true? Like,
I don't know.
Because
I'll tell you. I mean, there's
so how can we transform that person's karma? Like,
that's a very good question, right? So we said the Zuluk, the tradition of the Abhidhamma Kosha by Vasubandhu, which is that you can't. And then there's the Kunduluk by Asanga, which is that you can. Right. So you might know there's this story from the sutras that I think you've been to some Vipassana retreats, right? Yeah. So Goenka, he tells that story from the sutra of the boy who asked the Buddha to help his father, who was a sinner, and he died, and can you please help him to be reborn in a better place? And the Buddha says, sure, just fill 2 pots, put 1 pot with butter and 1 pot with stones, and throw them in the river. And then he does that, and the one with butter, it floats, and one with stones sinks. And the Buddha said, now pray that the one with stones floats. Right? Yeah. So that's the understanding in the Hinayana system, is that you can't do that. In the Mahayana system, it's said to be that you can. it's a hard thing. I mean, it would seem, in some sense to contradict some of these things in like the Buddhist teachings about Dani Dagi Goniande Dagi Dagi Drayanyan. Like, I am my own protector, I am my own enemy. Right? It's like, how can somebody else influence you in that way? Actually, a few years ago when we were at Kopan, Lama Tsongkhapa was kind enough to give us teachings during the lockdown. And so he was talking about this, and I get into a bit of a debate with him, and because I was trying to understand kind of how this works, right? But I think the understanding is that it has to do with subtle dependent arising. That it's not just this very coarse thing, I'm me and you are you, when we're completely separate. Like, we are very much, tied in or kind of entangled. Yeah, the word I'm looking for here would like be entangled with other people. When we get into karmic relations with people, that creates this bond that stays wherever we are. So our state of mind and our what we're doing, it can affect them, especially if that bond is very strong. It doesn't mean that we can just immediately lift them out of samsara, but it does mean that it's not just this complete, discrete. Discrete would mean that there's one thing, there's two. They're completely separate. Like you have two trees, they look like they have no relation, but if you go underground, there's these roots that are actually entangled with each other. That there is some more subtle level of things that are going on, which seems to be the Mahayana understanding, that dependent arising is much more profound than is sometimes presented in the Hinayana. And when we say Hinayana, I don't mean the sutras per se, because it's more the interpretation of the sutras by people like Vasubandhu in Zo, when he's saying specifically this can't happen, whereas the Sangha is of the opinion that it can. Okay. Yeah.
Just very quick. Is it valid to think of it as saying everybody has to create their own causes, but we can change the conditions?
Yeah, I think that's the understanding generally that's presented, is that if the cause isn't there, there's not a whole lot you can do, but it can influence what cause ripens. That's the same understanding. Like, for example, if we say, well, I can't help anybody else. Well, why can't I be a doctor? Doctors don't help anybody? Well, then what's the point of trying to help anybody ever, right? So we accept, okay, you can be a doctor and that you give someone medicine and it helps them. The understanding is you're playing with the conditions, right? If somebody has a very strong karma to die, then it's very hard to find the right medicine for them. But if there's different karmas that are different potentials, but you help one potential to ripen by putting the conditions for that to ripen. So really the question, I think, it's not about can you help somebody else, because that's obvious that you can. Nobody would deny that. The question is more, can there be a psychophysical influence without the medium of a physical body, which is a completely different question from the question of karma. But if we do if we grant that there is some kind of psychophysical connection between beings, then there's no reason that shouldn't be able to function. If we again grant that there is some kind of being in the bardo that is still existing at a subtle level. It's just a question of whether that is the case, right? Once we have that, then it doesn't necessarily contradict karma to say that there's some ability to benefit somebody else. Okay.
So you can also say no, you have no time. Okay. I just was wondering the definition of gangsak, since it came up.
Gangsak. Yeah.
And I've recently learned that gangsak also applies to animals.
Yeah, gangsak includes any sentient being, or not even sentient being, any being. It's more extensive than a sentient being, because a Buddha is also a gangsak.
So why do we call it person in English?
Well, it's sort of the best way we can come up with, right?
But a cow is not a person.
Depends who's
translating
it, right?
What?
Depends whose translation.
Yeah, I guess how else would we translate it? I don't know.
Well,
being? Yeah, we usually use being. Being is usually kwebu, and living being is luchen. Sentient being is sentient. It's just like they have to choose something, and it's like a neutral. But I guess you just then it comes up. You have to, come to understand that in this philosophy, persons include non-human beings. It's cows and ghosts and Buddhas.
Can you say being?
Well, that's what I'm saying. They usually use being for kebu. And I guess we could use it. It's just a matter of this has become kind of the standard thing. Gangzak, it's a funny etymology, right? Gangzak, it means fall. So you're full of afflictions and you fall into samsara. Gangzak. Which is a bit odd then why a Buddha should be a Gangzak. But it's just, etymologically that's what it means. That's not actually the meaning of the word. It's just the etymology of the word.
One of Indian friend, he asked me a question. I did not get an answer. I'm just asking. Especially in Theravada tradition, Buddha's karma, when Siddhartha became Buddha, after that he had many bad karmas, like Devdatta, he threw the stone on him. He had a headache. Then the Pali Sutra, they said it happened because of his past karma. In one life, he put poison into the well. And the fish, they died. That's why Buddha had headache, and this they're telling about that. So is that true, or like? Buddha
again, that's a difference in the viewpoint. So again, the Zuluk, right? And the Hinayana, but especially the view of Vasubandhu. So in their system, yes, that the Buddha still has negative karma that ripens because the body is still the truth of suffering. It's still Zakje, it's still contaminated. So Zakje Bumpo. So it still can experience suffering as a result of past karma, just like the Arhats who haven't passed into nirvana. Whereas in the Mahayana view, that's not the case. So it's two different viewpoints of how that happens. And so in the Mahayana view, then every experience of the Buddha of any kind of hardship as the Buddha was just a manifestation of the disciples' karma. It had nothing to do with the Buddha himself.
He's showing just
showing that aspect based on the what the disciples are able to perceive.
Zepa Chuni something?
Zepa. I mean, Zepa Chuni is the 12, but then in general, there's all the different Zepa and Napa Dempa showing the aspect. Okay. Good.
I'm not quite sure with the tunes for the slow version, so if anybody knows, then please. From my recollections, vast the space that I have amassed from working with effort at this practice for a great length of time, may I become the chief leading Buddha for all those whose minds with the mind is blinded by ignorance. Even if I did not reach this state, may I be held in your loving compassion for all my life and Jushri. May I find the best of the great created paths of teachings, and may I have this all Buddhas by practice. Using
skillful means drawn by the strong force of compassion, may I clear the dullness from the minds of beings with the points of the path as I have discerned them. May I hold the blessed teachings for a very long time.
With my
May
heart
that going out with great compassion, whenever the direction the most precious teachings do not yet spread, or once spread have declined,
may
I reveal this treasure of happiness and aid.
May
The minds of those who wish for liberation be granted boundless peace,
and the
Buddha's deeds be nourished for a long time. By even this great path to enlightenment completed through the wondrous virtuous deed of Buddha's and Bodhisattvas, may all human and non-human beings who eliminate diversity and create conducive conditions for practicing the excellent paths never be parted any of their lives from the purest path praised by the Buddhas. Whenever someone makes an effort to act in accordance with tenfold Mahayana virtue and practices, may he always be assisted by the mighty ones,